A number of European countries that share borders with Russia are pushing for more EU-wide restrictions on visas granted to Russian nationals. They worry that potential saboteurs, including members of Russia's Secret Service, are entering Europe on tourist visas and traveling in the visa-free Schengen area. A leaked document shows that while the number of approvals is near zero in states bordering Russia, France, Italy, and Spain still offer generous welcomes, setting off alarm bells elsewhere.
Pro-Ukraine protesters forced the closure of the Russian pavilion at the Venice Biennale art show. A reminder not everyone in Europe is ready to receive visitors from a country that started a war on their border. But the Italian government is among 3 countries still rolling out the welcome mat for Russian citizens, as we can see in a document leaked to DW, first reported by Euractiv, which reveals that France even increased the number of Russian visas it granted last year. This despite the European Commission banning multiple entry visas 6 months ago, emphasizing concerns about Russian visitors, such as
the increased security risks stemming from Russia's unprovoked and unjustified war of aggression against Ukraine, including the weaponization of migration, acts of sabotage, and the potential misuse of visas.
Last year, France granted visas to almost 180,000 Russians, then free to move throughout the Schengen zone with no notification. Countries on the EU's eastern flank have dropped their visa approvals to near zero and are urging other governments to follow suit.
The European region actually issued more than 600,000 visas last year, and it is increasing. It's immediate threat to our people because Russian Secret Service is sending people, organizing different sabotage acts and killing our people, so this is not normal.
But the EU can't control member states' borders, and France says it's following the rules. A government official told me French authorities are granting visas on a case-by-case basis after analysis of each situation and after having operated all the necessary security checks in full compliance with the guiding lines of the EU Commission. But that's not good enough for many people. Estonia is leading a group of countries concerned that some of these tourist groups may include Russian soldiers. They're arguing to create a Schengen blacklist that would automatically block anyone who's fought in Russia's war against Ukraine. Former Lithuanian Foreign Minister Gabrielis Landsbergis says the visa statistics lay bare hypocrisy in the positions of some European governments.
Look, we have to imagine a very high probability that the person who fought in the war, who was just recently, maybe days or weeks ago, was killing Ukrainians or trying to kill Ukrainians, then the next thing he knows, he's vacationing in Paris and taking pictures of Eiffel Tower. And it's the same person. And then we're saying that we're supporting Ukraine.
Estonia's Sakna says the issue of granting these visas is a matter of public security. So he's glad these figures have been revealed.
European people should decide whether we would like to welcome these ex-combatants or Russian people just to come to visit Europe, and we are not sure actually who they are.
EU leaders are expected to discuss a Schengen blacklist for Russian ex-combatants at their next summit in June.
DW correspondent Terry Schultz filed that report, and she joins me now from Brussels. Good to see you, Terry. Now, France, Italy, and Spain are the desired destinations for nearly 75% of all Russian visa applicants. So it's perhaps not surprising that these states are also granting the most visas.
That's one way to look at it and think about it. These are probably the most desired destinations for most people seeking a tourist visa into Europe. Of course, they have some of the most beautiful and most popular cities in Europe. But what these countries along the eastern flank are saying is that they would like to see these countries perhaps give up some of these tourist dollars in order to show solidarity, not just with their European partners along the eastern flank who are worried about security, but also with Ukraine. And think about the Ukrainians who are under constant bombardment and can't come and go. I mean, the men in Ukraine have to serve in the army, and they can't freely cross the border. So what people like the Estonians, Lithuanians, and Latvians are saying is, why should Russian citizens whose country started this war on Ukraine have a better standard of living than the Ukrainians? That's why they would like to see, that's one reason they would like to see these visas curtailed sharply.
We heard in your report that France has actually issued more visas in 2025, and countries like Estonia then have stopped almost entirely. How does Paris justify that?
That's right. And we should be clear. The number of visas issued by France increased from 2024 to 2025. So they're on the rise again. There was a sharp cut after the war on Ukraine started when the EU said, look, we really need to be more careful about who we let in and especially the Russian citizens. But this number does seem to be climbing again, and particularly in France. Now, when I asked French officials, and we also asked both the Italian and Spanish foreign ministers directly yesterday at their meeting, they all said the same thing. We're not doing anything illegal. We're following the rules. And that is true. The only thing that has actually been banned is multiple entry visas, which means you get approved once and you can come and go several times. Now, what the EU said when making this rule was that this would provide additional scrutiny. Somebody couldn't go in, perhaps get in trouble, and it not be discovered by border authorities. So the French, Italians, and Spanish are saying we're following these rules.
All right, let's take a closer look at the rules then, because there are potential security risks here. Are Russian visa applicants being vetted more thoroughly than those from other countries?
I'm sure there are other countries which also get a pretty thorough vetting, but there are certainly countries which don't get looked at as closely as the Russian visas. So the rules when a Russian applies is that they have to prove, for example, that they have funds, that they have an intention to return to their country. They will also be checked against the Schengen system's database to make sure that none of them have ever gotten in trouble in the EU before, that they don't have any sort of security flags on their identity. They may be fingerprinted, and again, not allowing them to have a multiple entry visa, as people from many other countries do have, provides the capability for this added scrutiny. But a lot of these countries are saying that's just not enough.
Mm-hmm. These countries are not happy about it. Why do they believe these visa applicants and the people who receive them are linked to security or sabotage incidents in Europe? Is there any proof of that?
They're not saying that these specific people that, there surely are some innocent tourists, but it costs a lot of money to travel from Russia to any of these beautiful cities. And remember that direct flights are under sanctions. They can't fly directly, so they're spending even more money to get here than you would if Russia wasn't under such heavy sanctions. So one thing is that these are probably people who are enriching Putin's regime in some way. That's one of the thoughts of reasoning. On the other hand, a lot of these countries, especially along the border, but also Germany, have suffered increasing acts of sabotage. The number of these incidents have at least quadrupled, according to security experts, and there have been prosecutions of Russian citizens or Russia-linked citizens, Russian proxies, in countries like Poland, Lithuania, Estonia. Those people have already been brought to trial and sentenced for these crimes. So there is a record that some Russians do not have, the best of intentions when coming to Europe.
Mm-hmm. A Schengen blacklist, we heard it in your report, will be discussed in June. Now, getting on the same page in the EU is always a bit of a struggle. Do you think we're actually going to see changes to the visa rules in the EU anytime soon?
So interestingly, with all of these different views on whether Russian tourists should be allowed in, I'm told that there actually is quite a lot of agreement on creating this Schengen blacklist. Now, remember that this is primarily for ex-combatants, for people who can be proven to have been fighting in the war in Ukraine. And perhaps there's a lower bar for that. Maybe European leaders can more easily see why you don't want a Russian soldier to come into your country. They have certain skills that an average tourist would not. So I'm told that there is actually a chance that this could happen. And Estonia and other countries are already compiling lists of people they know have fought in the war in Ukraine. Estonia, for example, has rejected visas for at least 1,000 people that they know are trained soldiers. And there is another thing that I learned from Gabrielius Landsbergis and then followed up with a document that also is not public. And that is something called the Schengen nuclear option, according to him. And this is the case that an EU country can force another EU country to let them actually screen the applicants for visas from certain countries. And Russia is one of those countries. So while this sounds very complicated, it would mean in practice that anyone applying for a visa in Paris would actually have to be approved by Vilnius. And as Landsbergis points out, that could take a very long time and would slow down the process a lot. So they do have some leverage when threatening that they want these visas cut back on or else.
Fascinating stuff. Glad to have you on the story. That was Terry Schultz in Brussels. Thanks so much.
Thank you.